the fierce hive in the heart of the jungle. The sun had just begun to rise above the dense canopy of the ancient rainforest, its golden rays filtering through the thick foliage like scattered beams of fire. The air was heavy with mist, every breath laced with the earthy fragrance of moss, decaying leaves, and wild blossoms. Deep in this primeval wilderness, where every step could lead to danger or discovery, two men prepared themselves for a task that demanded equal measures of strength, courage, and patience: the capture of a wild and notoriously fierce beehive. The two men were not strangers to the forest. For years, they had lived as hunters of honey, climbers of impossible trees, and explorers of forgotten valleys where nature ruled with silent authority. Their names were Daniel and Marcus, friends since childhood, bonded not only by blood but also by sweat, scars, and shared adventures. Each had his own strength. Daniel was agile, quick-witted, and fearless in the face of risk, often leaping into action without hesitation. Marcus, on the other hand, was deliberate and methodical, his wisdom and patience grounding Daniel's restless energy. Together, they formed a perfect balance, a team capable of tackling even the most perilous challenges. Their reputation as fearless honey hunters had spread across villages that bordered the jungle. People spoke of them in hushed tones, about how Daniel once scaled a tree as tall as a cathedral to harvest a hive swarming with black bees, or how Marcus had stared down a snake as thick as a man's leg while climbing for wild honey. But today's challenge was unlike anything they had faced before. Word had reached them of a hive deep in the interior of the forest. A hive so large and aggressive that even the bravest hunters had refused to approach it. The locals called it the demon hive, for its bees were said to be faster, stronger, and more venomous than ordinary wild bees. Daniel and Marcus, however, were drawn to the story like moths to flame. For them, the greater the danger, the sweeter the reward. They packed their tools, smoking torches made of dried leaves and resin, long ropes coiled like snakes, protective cloth wraps, and sharp machetes to cut through the jungle's thorny undergrowth. With these, they set out at dawn, leaving behind the safety of their small wooden hut at the forest's edge. As they ventured deeper, the jungle came alive around them. Parrots screamed overhead, monkeys leapt from tree to tree, and the occasional growl of some hidden predator echoed through the dense foliage. The ground was uneven and slippery, roots and vines twisting like traps across their path. Sweat poured from their brows as they hacked their way forward, the machetes singing with each swing. By midday, the air had grown suffocating, the kind of humid heaviness that clung to their skin and slowed their movements. Yet, they pressed on. Marcus paused often, crouching low to examine tracks on the forest floor, ensuring they avoided dangerous territories marked by wild boars or even leopards. Daniel, impatient, urged him forward. "We're close," Daniel said, his voice tinged with excitement. "I can feel it. The air smells different, sweeter, thicker. The hive must be near." Marcus nodded but cautioned. "Remember, this hive is unlike the others. One mistake, and we won't return. Keep your fire ready." At last, after hours of trekking, they reached a clearing. In its center stood a colossal tree, its trunk as wide as a house, rising high into the heavens. From one of its thick branches hung the hive they had come for, a monstrous structure that glistened like molten gold in the filtered sunlight. It was larger than any hive they had ever seen, a living fortress that pulsed with the restless energy of thousands of bees. The constant buzz reverberated through the air, a low and menacing hum that made the ground seem to tremble. Daniel's eyes widened in awe.
Wow.
"Look at it, it's magnificent." Marcus studied it carefully. "Magnificent, yes, but deadly. We'll need to be smart." The hive's bees were unlike any they had seen before. Their bodies were darker, their wings sharper, and their movements swift and aggressive. Even from a distance, a few scouts darted toward the men, warning them of the wrath that awaited intruders. They set their plan into motion. Marcus gathered dry leaves, bark, and resin to build a smoldering fire at the base of the tree. The smoke would rise slowly, calming the bees and reducing their fury. Daniel, meanwhile, prepared the ropes and checked the knots, his gaze fixed on the hive above as though he were staring at a prize he had dreamed of all his life. When the fire was lit and smoke began to curl upward, Marcus took the lead. Despite his age and heavier build, he was a skilled climber. his movements steady and measured. Daniel followed closely, his youthful energy driving him upward with speed. The higher they climbed, the more the bees swarmed, forming dark clouds that buzzed angrily around them. The smoke offered some protection, but the bees were relentless. They stung at their hands, their necks, even through the protective cloth wrapped around their bodies. Each sting burned like fire, each attack testing their resolve. Yet, neither man retreated. They pressed upward, step by agonizing step, until they reached the branch that held the hive. Up close, the hive was terrifying in its beauty. The wax shimmered in the light, dripping with golden honey that oozed from its sides. The air was thick with the scent of nectar, overpowering and intoxicating, but the bees defended it with unyielding fury, swarming so densely that Daniel and Marcus could barely see. Marcus steadied himself, pulling out a smoking torch and waving it gently around the hive's base. The bees retreated slightly, their movements slowed by the thick smoke. Daniel, seizing the moment, drew his knife and began to cut into the hive. The wax gave way with a sticky resistance, and honey spilled out, coating his hands like liquid sunlight. The hive shuddered with the disturbance, and the bees erupted in a frenzy. They launched themselves at the intruders, stinging with a rage that seemed almost intelligent. Daniel gritted his teeth, enduring the pain, while Marcus shielded him as best he could with the torch. Faster, Marcus urged, his voice strained. Take what we can and move before they overwhelm us. Daniel worked quickly, slicing off a massive chunk of the hive and lowering it into the basket tied to his waist. The honey dripped endlessly, golden streams falling through the air like rain. Another piece followed, then another, until the basket was nearly full. But with every cut, the bees grew more desperate, their attacks more vicious. At one point, a swarm broke through the smoke and descended upon Marcus, stinging his face and arms. He cried out, nearly losing his grip, but Daniel reached out and steadied him. Hold on, just a little more, Daniel shouted. Despite the agony, Marcus held firm, his strength and willpower keeping them both alive. Together, they secured the harvest, tying the heavy basket to the rope so it could be lowered safely to the ground. Once the hive pieces were secured, they began their descent, moving as fast as their battered bodies would allow. The journey down was chaos. The bees pursued them relentlessly, stinging and buzzing with a ferocity that made every second feel like an eternity. Daniel's vision blurred from the pain, his skin swelling with welts, but he focused only on reaching the ground. Marcus, though slower, never faltered, his determination carrying him through the storm. At last, their feet touched the earth. Gasping for breath, they stumbled away from the tree, dragging the heavy basket behind them. The smoke from their fire still lingered, offering a final shield as the bees retreated back to their hive. Victorious in defending what remained, collapsed on the forest floor, Daniel and Marcus lay side by side, their bodies covered in stains, their clothes torn, but their hearts filled with triumph. Between them sat the basket, overflowing with honey, thick, golden, and glistening like treasure pulled from the earth itself. Daniel laughed weakly, his voice hoarse. We did it, against all odds. We did it. Marcus managed a smile, though his face was swollen. Yes, but remember, the hive still stands. It will live on. We only borrowed a piece of its kingdom. They rested for hours before finding the strength to rise and begin the long journey home. Every step was painful, but their spirits soared with victory. They had faced the demon hive, challenged nature's fiercest defenders, and emerged alive. The forest closed behind them, swallowing their path, as if keeping the secret of their triumph hidden from the world. Yet the story of Daniel and Marcus, the honey hunters who braved the fiercest hive, would spread like fire, becoming legend in the villages. And somewhere, high in the jungle canopy, the bees rebuilt their shattered fortress, ready once more to defend their golden kingdom against any who dared to challenge them.